Hello everyone, my name is Harold Bergeron, and in the next 20 minutes I'm going to show you how you can configure Extrata Enterprise to call many of the Watson APIs or weather data APIs, point to a source input table via JSON database source, configure the specific API properties and features, and also write back to a selected output source, ODBC table, JSON, and then use that information in your reporting environment. Before I show you how Extrata Enterprise works and the steps required to configure it, I want to explain to you a little story of why this was created in the first place. As I'm not a coder and don't know or don't care to be a coder, some of you may be coders and may know Python and JSON and so on. Most analytics individuals do not know how to code. But because customers want to ingest this information, I had to figure out a way of doing this simply. So imagine yourself, we were given a table saying, here's all the surveys from what we got from yesterday or from a couple of days ago. I want you to take this survey information and I want you to call a Watson API. Well, the first thing I had to learn is, okay, how do I call this Watson API? And as you can see in this example of the tutorial, you need to know quite a few products. In this case, you need to know how to curl, you need to know what the syntax needs to be, you need to how to structure your JSON. Now, that's not what I do for a living, and I'm sure a lot of you are in the same boat as I am, is that this is left to the coders. So how can we simplify this was really the task, especially that once I learned how to call this, and not just call it once, but call it multiple times, or in other words, iterate that table. So I have to learn not just how to make the call, but I need to know how to loop through the calls so that I get a result back. And then I guess once you get the result back, it looks something like this. Now, that's fine for someone that knows how to decipher this and break it down. But as you notice, this is not flattened. So I've made a call and I've got multiple results here. Now, how am I going to ingest that into a reporting tool? And how easily is that done? Sure, you can go out to a website and send this JSON. It'll parse it out to an Excel, but you want to automate this process. So therefore, really what we wanted to do is take that input, read this JSON, flatten this JSON in something that looks something like this into a table. So now I've got, not only do I have every row that I called, but I also have an analyzed ID. In other words, I've got a link from my main table to the results table so that I can go back now and join it into my reporting to say, all right, give me all the results or all the analysis or all the sentiments for this specific text or this journal entry, and let's consume that somehow. So now that was the basis of why we actually wrote this product. So now that we wrote it for ourselves, so I think everyone can use this product, or many people, even data scientists that may know how to code, but may not want to spend that time. And then the next step is if you want to schedule and, in other words, bring it into production, that is a whole other step where we've built that into our scheduling tool so that all that can be done. So in a nutshell, this was built based on necessity. And as we all know, necessity is the mother of invention. Now let me show you how to configure Extrata Enterprise to do this in 15 minutes. Step 1. Installing Extrata Enterprise on Windows or Mac. Select the zip file. Make sure you unzip it into a temporary directory. Go into that temporary directory. Select Extrata Enterprise, in my case Windows. Follow the simple instructions. Installation should take no longer than 30 seconds. Once it is installed, the main Extrata window will show up. Before moving on to step 2, let's do a bit of house cleaning. When you received and restored the Extrata backup, it had default folders from my machine. Depending on where you've set up, you may need to set up new folders and reset the defaults. First step is go to your settings and then go to default paths and either create these default paths within your C drive or create new ones, and then you will simply have to go to every project and change the default paths to that project to be these ones. It will take you a few minutes if you wish, but it's worthwhile, as that way when you run your API calls, you will not get a message that the default folders are not set up. Step 2, restoring our Extrata Enterprise templates to save you time and get started very quickly. You should have received a backup file. The date may be different, but it should be called Extrata Backup. Within the Extrata product, quite simply go on the right hand side to Settings, go to Backup and Restore, click Restore from Backup, browse to the folder. In our case here, we're going to go to Downloads, Extrata Downloads, Extrata Backup. Enter the password that was sent to you. Click Restore. Very quickly, now if you go to Projects, you will see you will have a whole bunch of template projects that we will cover in the next session, as well as sources. Again, these are sample source connections to Watson APIs, to weather data, and to other products that we have built within this. For example, connections to DB2 Cloud, a connection to Postgres on Cloud, or to a direct SQL within your database. These are all going to be used as import sources and output sources, as well as Excel and CSV and JSON. Step 3, reviewing the sources from the templates we just restored. You go up to the top tab, you will see something called Sources. By clicking that, it will show you all the sources that you have as far as starting points. Some of the example is Watson Compare and Comply, Watson Natural Language Understanding, which we'll review in more detail, Personality Insight, Speech to Text, Tone Analyzer, Weather Company Enhanced Forecast, Weather Company Historical. We also have a couple examples of the connection strings required to connect to DB2 on cloud, as well as Postgres on cloud, and also directly to a SQL database on-prem. All these examples will be used in our projects as far as input sources and output sources and the calls we want to make, as mentioned in previous step 2. So now let's go look at Watson Natural Language Understanding, which is actually a fairly big API that has many properties. Remember, again, the key to this is to be able to point to a Watson API, send it some information, and return some information and write it back to a database or to a CSV or to a JSON format so it can be consumed somewhere else. All of this, again, is without code. So in this example here, in our Watson NLU, you would quite simply, for your example, if you wanted to create a new one, is create a new source. But by simply going into edit mode, the only thing you will have to change in edit mode is the API key here. Once you have done that and put your credentials in, that Watson NLU API is used and ready for all calls that you will make in each project. In step 4, let's go review a project that uses Watson NLU and some of the features that are available within each task. To the top, you will click Projects. Within Projects, for our example here, you can go to the Watson NLU. But if you want example of other APIs, just simply click on that API and you will have the information in some templates you can use as a starting point. For our case, let's go to Watson NLU. The first thing you will notice is the tasks. The tasks are the features that Watson NLU are set up when you're setting up a call to the API. As you may or may not know, Watson NLU has sentiment analysis, categories, concepts, emotions, entities, and etc. Those are the properties the API call allow us to use. In my example, I'll quite simply select sentiment targets input file. To the right, I am going to go to the edit tasks so you get an idea of what can be done. First thing is, you'll notice I've called the project Watson NLU. The source is the source we've set up, in our case, Watson NLU. The source service is the natural language understanding, which gets brought in. As far as the task, I've given it a description is I want to go after the sentiment of this text and looking for specific target keywords. I can absolutely set up a task description. The text analytics feature, in my case, I've selected sentiment, but these are where all of the properties of the Watson API are. We've tried to put most of them, or most of them that make sense, with the API key. We've selected sentiment in our case. Based on the content of my paragraphs that I know, I'm looking for specific words, in my case, feet, season, leaked, and seeing what type of sentiments I would get in any customer surveys I've received. The content type I've used is text, but as you see, again, based on the features of the API, I have URL and HTML. Keep in mind, all of this would have to be coded in an API call, where here it's simply a configuration and not a scripting. Use an iterator. An iterator is the option of reading an input file. In our case here, where you're reading an Excel or CSV file, but quite simply, this iterator could be a database where I could select, use an existing data source where I could read, and then that data source would have a select statement saying something, return me all the rows that have been updated since an hour ago, therefore only returning the surveys that have been received within the hour and doing the analysis on it. I've selected, in my case again, just to repeat, I've selected a CSV template or input file. The first row has column names. In my case, the delimiter is a comma. And I've actually told it the field names that I want to use to track two things. For each row I'm getting from the input file, I want to write to the output file that unique ID. And the reason I want to do that is so that I can join the source table to the output table so I can create a relationship in my reporting side. In this case here, could be Cognos, but it could be any other product you want. So I've selected, this is my unique ID. Content to analyze is the text from that table. Now, my primary output, I have a couple of options. In this case here, I've done actually two different options. I've saved to an output table. I've called the output table a specific name, and I've given it a format of file type XLS. But as you can see again, you can do JSON or CSV. It all depends on how you are going to use this in your reporting side and what you actually want to do with it. I've also chosen to write to a database. The database name is a data source that I've created, which is my SQL on-prem. The table name is Watson Sentiment Targets Input File. Table type is predefined table. Keep in mind, if you've selected predefined tables, this table with all of the fields must exist in your SQL or your output source. We do also have some sample create tables that would allow you to create the tables that are being generated here automatically within SQL, DB2, and Postgres at this point in time. In my case, I also want to track logs. I want to see if I hit any errors and what it has done, and I want to keep track of it. You can simply put in a timestamp so that every time it's run, you have a different log table if you wish. I'm going to click Save. Now, my option, I have an option right here of clicking Run this sentiment, which is what I'm going to do. This is a manual process, but we also have a client version where that could be all scheduled, and each task could be scheduled as you may have multiple tasks within a project. An example of that is you may want to go after that same text and go get sentiment, keywords, and emotions. And because Watson NLU charges by feature, this is why we've separated out each feature as a different task. So let's go run the task. And when running the task, a window will pop up showing you every row it is extracting and the results and if it was added to the database. This same type of information is written into the log file. When it is complete, you would be able to close the window and then go check your database or your tables with the results, which I will show you in a minute. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm simply opening up the Excel output file, but this same information is actually also written in the SQL database. To look at the results, everything is date stamped, and it has the requested body of what we requested, the usage text characters, so how many characters that I actually analyzed, the feature, the language, the analyzed text, and then again the content to analyze ID. As you can see, I have multiple rows for my first ID, one row for the second, third, and fourth, meaning that I only found certain target keywords in some of the context. But the key to this is that now for analyzed ID 1, I have 3 rows which would most likely link back to a customer ID that did this survey, which I can link that ID with the output and do my reporting on. In this case, it was negative. So this again is a very simple example that how I've taken some text, called the Watson API, outputted it to a table, and now I can use it in any reporting tool I want. All this without one line of code. This is a very simple example, but if you are interested in more, please contact me at the following address and phone number.